I'm Seth Levine. I'm a co-founder and partner at Foundry Group. We're an early stage tech venture capital firm based in Boulder, but we invest across the country. So we like to call ourselves thematic investors. We invest across a handful of different themes. Things like human-computer interaction. We've done quite a bit in ad tech, which we call adhesive, sort of connective ad technology products. So we've done quite a bit in those two areas. We've done a lot in sort of middleware, what we call glue. And then we've done a number of investments across a few other themes around like digital life, digital home kind of stuff. We're probably best known at the moment for having invested in the A round of Zynga, the gaming company. We also were early investors, seed investors in AdMeld, which Google bought for $400 million last year, a couple other things like that. Yeah, so I've got about 11 or 12 companies that I sit on the board of. A handful of them are in New York. Quite a few of them are in sort of the ad tech space. Medialets, which does rich media advertising for mobile. I'm on the board of a company called SideTour, which came out of Techstars 2 classes ago now, which is a company that helps. It's really a platform for people to advertise sort of unique and differentiated experiences. Experts to show you and 10 friends how to make pasta, things like that. We've got some James Beard chefs on it. We've got graffiti artists in Brooklyn, things like that. I'm also on the board of an analytics company here in New York called Giraffe. They do analytics for e-commerce. So a bunch of companies like that. We've got an SEM marketing company, which actually I co-founded, called Trada, which is out of Boulder. We've got a company that's sort of reinventing genealogy, search, and product called Macavo, also in Boulder. So those are all kind of examples of the sorts of things that we've done. A lot of things that I write are sort of the germination or the seed is something that I observed, right? Something happened at a portfolio company, and I thought, you know what? This is something that other people want to hear about. So in this case, I wrote a contribution for you guys that was about hiring as a core competency, and this was out of a direct experience at a company where we were struggling a little bit with sort of what was the process going to be around hiring, and I started asking around and realizing not a lot of companies have a process for hiring. They sort of think they have a process for hiring, which is to say they have this idea that you go through an interview and you have multiple interviews and then people sit down and they compare notes and things like that. But that, as it turns out, is a really bad way to try to hire someone, right? I mean, the idea that a bunch of different people who have no background and training in HR or interviewing could sit down with someone sort of ad hoc and randomly, right? They just came from doing something and there's this guy in the conference room, it's your turn to go interview them. That's just not a good way to hire someone. And so at the company in question, we were trying to put in place a much more specific process for hiring. Right? And all companies will tell you that their most important assets are the people that work there. And all companies will tell you that you should hire slowly and fire fast, all those sorts of cliches. But not a lot of companies actually put a lot of thought into what hiring slowly really means. And so the post was encouraging businesses to develop a process for hiring, to train their employees to do things like interview, to have a real process for when you do group interviews, when you do one-on-one interviews, so that you make better choices when you're hiring people and you have a more consistent practice in terms of your hiring. One, everyone's really busy. The reason they're hiring someone is because they need to add to the team and everyone's too busy. And so they don't allocate the time to do it. I think number 2 is that companies don't kind of sit down as a group beforehand, right? Maybe the hiring group, and say, here's why we're hiring this person, here's the background we want, here's what we're looking for, here's the process that we want to put them through, and here are sort of the things we want to make sure we get and the things we want to make sure we don't get. And lastly, companies have an incredibly ad hoc process once someone has gone through an interview for kind of pulling back together, right? There's not a sort of a declarative, here's the list of things that we're going to talk about and here's how we're going to evaluate this candidate. At best you get in a room and say, what do you think? More likely people are just sending asynchronous emails like, oh yeah, I thought she was great. But not putting a lot of thought behind that and maybe not mapping that back directly to thing number 1 and number 2, which is why were you hiring in the first place? I think the most important thing to build is consistency. Right? I think when you think about what startups do, there's consistency in how they manage the product process. There's consistency in how they manage a dev process. There's consistency in how they manage marketing. They measure it all these things that sort of go into creating a real process. And when it comes to HR, it's totally ad hoc. And I think that's a mistake. I think companies need to actually be a lot more thoughtful about what that process looks like, put candidates through a very consistent process so you can measure outcomes, right, and make good decisions. I mean, I think the best people that you can find are referrals, right, especially from your own employees. They have a vested interest. They know what kind of culture you have. They want to see their friends work with them. They want to work with people that they like, et cetera. So to the extent to which you can lean on your employees, and they're not just sort of blanket referral programs, right? A lot of companies just sort of throw that out there, but the companies that are really successful in this make it part of the company culture. And so it's less about, oh, you get $1,000 if your buddy signs up and they're still there in a month. And it's more about, part of the core culture of our company is we love working here. And we do a lot of our own networking to get more great people here. And I think that's something a lot of companies actually don't do. The responsibility for hiring should fall on the entire organization, right? Which is to say that the entire organization, especially at the early stage, right, we're talking about companies of 10, 12, even 20, 30 people, should know here are the job openings, right? And should be on the lookout for people that they want to see part of the organization. Just because you're an engineer doesn't mean you don't know people that have marketing capabilities, for example, right? So I think most companies silo that process, and so the marketing department knows that they're looking for someone to manage demand generation or something like that, but no one else necessarily knows that. And just posting it on the external job board is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, part of your Monday stand-up or whatever your method of communicating with the entire organization is, should be talking about those positions that are open and what you're doing to bring candidates into the door. I like to think that every organization has room for one more person if they found someone that they thought was fantastic. And it's not uncommon to have a conversation with the CEO who comes to me and says, listen, I don't know what this person's going to do for us, but they are amazing, and we've got to figure out a way to get them in the organization. And I think that's okay, right? I think sometimes you can figure out the specifics later. And I think that, especially at the very early stage, a lot of what builds successful teams are getting incredibly passionate, motivated people together, right? And you sort of mix up a stew and it tastes great. In terms of the technology that people use, there's a lot of technology now that is kind of going after how to manage a hiring process, how to match for fit and things like that. We had a Techstars company in Boulder a couple years ago that has a really interesting platform that we've used as well called RoundPeg. And the idea is to help you hire for culture. And most times when there's a mismatch, it's not a skill mismatch with a company, it's a culture mismatch with a company. And you can pretty well tell, does this person have the background to be a financial analyst, to be a marketing person, to be a developer? But it's some of those soft characteristics that are a little bit more challenging. And RoundPeg, as a good example, is a company that's developed technology that helps you figure out whether there's that cultural fit. I think one of the biggest differences is that big companies hire for very specific positions, whereas small companies sometimes have the luxury to hire not just for specific positions. If you need a developer, you need a developer, but also have the ability to bring people in who are just great team players and figure out what to do. It's more of a sort of a holistic hiring process, and more the company has the ability to get involved. I think that puts smaller companies in a unique position relative to large companies who have a job rec, have a job specification, has to go through certain approvals, things like that. I think after I wrote this post on hiring, I wrote another post about HR as a core competency, and I think a lot of people sort of dismiss HR as sort of a process thing, like there's a process police going on. But I have to tell you, we've had a number of experiences within our portfolio where hiring a really good HR manager, let's say, people person, right, head of people, has been incredibly impactful on a business. And we've had a few cases where we had someone who was sort of like a process HR person, and we upgraded them to a real people, the person responsible for people within an organization, and it's made an incredible difference in terms of culture, in terms of hiring, in terms of people's happiness, all of those sorts of things that all add up to increasing the likelihood that a company will be successful. I think it depends a little bit on the company, depends a little bit on the CEO and what he or she values and where they place sort of the value of culture, but I think somewhere in the kind of 20 to 30 employee range is when there's a shift in the organization that it sort of gets large enough that someone like that is probably a good idea to at least think about hiring. I ask CEOs all the time, like, when in your startup, like, when did it change? Like, at what level? And there's sort of this universal or near universal agreement that around 30 people is when it starts to feel a little different as an organization. Maybe the CEO knows everyone's name but wasn't involved in hiring the next person, or doesn't really know anything about them beyond their name, for example. Or you pass someone in the hall and you think, I can't remember that person's name, or I don't know what that person does. And I mean, I've asked probably 100 CEOs this question, and 30 seems to be kind of the answer. And so that's a good indication that it's probably time to have someone focused on people within the organization that's not the CEO. When you have 10 people, it's the CEO, it's the founders, it's small enough to kind of get your hands around. You don't need someone who's specifically just focused on people. When you get past that tipping point, let's say 30 people, it's probably time to bring someone in who is just focused on that. A piece of advice that was given to me that I think has been critical in my career, and that I often tell people, and it's a little bit of a cliche, but when you surround yourself with great people and you seek out mentorship, you get a ton of advice that's incredibly invaluable. And I had a point in my career where I was sort of shifting careers and shifting jobs, and a really good friend of mine said, listen, I don't care what you do next, you've got to go find an amazing person to work for. And that was incredibly impactful advice for me. I don't think that necessarily for entrepreneurs means you have to go find a job and go work for someone who's amazing. That can also mean you need to surround yourself with an incredible group of advisors. And it's surprising. Sometimes I'll be looking at a company as a potential investment, and they'll refer me to some of their advisors. I had this happen really recently, and the advisor list was unbelievable. I mean, I couldn't believe the caliber of people that this guy, this entrepreneur, had convinced to work with him on an advisory basis. And so I was making some due diligence calls to talk to them about working with the company, and I asked all of them, how is it that you got connected to this? And every single one of them said, oh, John just called me, CEO just called me. And I agreed to meet, and gosh, he's so compelling. I'm sure that's the reason why you're interested in looking at this for an investment. And yeah, but he just made a phone call or sent me an email. And it's amazing how people will engage with you if you just ask them to. One of the things that people talk to me about or ask me about a lot is sort of entrepreneurial communities. We built this incredible community in Boulder, and people sort of want to know what the magic is. And I think that, so one, you could read my partner Brad's book on entrepreneurial communities, which has sort of his version of how you create this. I think people think of Boulder as sort of an overnight success, but the reality is it was 10 or 20 years in coming, right? I moved to Colorado in 1996. I started working in venture in Boulder in 2001. So we've been working on this for a while, but there's a couple keys. I mean, one is that the work that's being done is really distributed. There are lots of leaders. It's not sort of it doesn't all revolve around Foundry or me or Brad or whomever. It revolves around lots of different people who are coming together. It's a community that is highly interactive, where people feel the need to give back, right? Where if any entrepreneur can call any other entrepreneur and say, hey, I need 10 minutes of your time, can we go grab a cup of coffee? And they'll do it, right? And these are the things that have made Boulder, and we're trying to transport this a little bit as well now to Denver, really successful as a startup community. But I think one of the interesting things that's happening across the country is the democratization of entrepreneurship. Right? There are lots of entrepreneurs. We celebrate entrepreneurship. I think people are understanding how important small business is to the kind of the fabric of the country. And there are lots of great pockets of entrepreneurs in Oklahoma City and Des Moines and all these other places. And I think that there's no reason for an entrepreneur to feel like if they're not in New York, if they're not in Silicon Valley, if they're not in Boulder now, not in Austin, that they can't develop that entrepreneurial ecosystem where they are, and that they're not already a part of a vibrant community. And I would strongly encourage them to go after it in whatever community of whatever size that they live in.